Okay, very good. Let's call the meeting to order at 10:05 a.m. And the first item of business is the approval of the March meeting minutes. I sent you guys an email a couple days ago with a lot of stuff in it. Apologies for the information overload. But one of those was the March meeting minutes. So could I have a motion to approve?
Motion.
Can I have a second?
Kim,
Second?
second.
Okay, thank you. Ayes?
Aye, yeah. Yeah,
I myself. Okay, so that's 4 to pass.
No, I'll put you in the conference. Okay, let me grab it.
here we go.
Uh-oh.
Then I'm like, I'm already ready. I email it, and I'm like,
Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody hold for a moment. I'm gonna pause.
I'll call her.
Thank you, Jen.
Don't rush.
Okay, there we go. We really didn't want the town business being advertised on a public meeting. Okay. All right, so agenda item 1 is done. Open items. So you all should have seen the email that I sent. I sent over 407-144 with the updates to the agricultural animals code and asked Pete to run that through his committee, as well as the accessory use law, which is 407-142, accessory use law recommendations and kind of what we were thinking of. Wendy, I took that original document that you had sent because what we had done is we took the original, then we kind of compressed it to what it should be, what it was in the newly revised local law 2022, local law 3. So I just gave them that last sheet of that had the writing on it of kind of where they needed to reinsert the agricultural stuff. So hopefully that was clear. Jen, I think you're on that committee, aren't you?
Yes, and we don't meet until the end of the month.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. I wasn't sure how frequently you met. Is it just monthly?
It's as needed, so it's as our docket gets filled up.
Okay, all right. Okay, so those two will go in front of you this month, do you think?
I would assume so. It's up to
Okay.
Pete. He calls the shots. He kind of gives us a heads up, or Rhonda does, and then about a week before.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, so I sent out a couple of documents around the next point of business, which is agricultural definitions. So I think we semi-tackled this when we did the right to farm law, because if you look at the right to farm law, and I can share my screen, hang on just a moment. Yeah, so this is the right, can you guys see that? Okay, so this is the right to farm law, the current right to farm law that's passed on the island, and I just stripped out this definitions portion. So the definitions, this is all the definitions, right? Starts with agricultural practices, products, then it identifies all of the current Article 25AA, the state laws around, and this is current, I just looked this up the other day. So these are all the state approved agricultural products. And then we put in farmer, farmland, farm operation, farm woodland. So I think what we're missing, and let me stop this share and share Word for a second, because I think we're just missing, and the question is, do we want to add these definitions? That's Acrobat, this is the one I need. Okay. All right, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Great. So these, this is obviously old, right? This has been updated because this is from when we were still a supervisor committee that we pulled together some of this stuff. So what we didn't identify, and I guess the question is, do we want to identify these? And there may be more that we need to talk through, but do we want to add those? Because I believe the right place to be would be in the right to farm law. Is that right, Wendy? Like, I feel like
Um,
that's where the other
You
definitions.
don't
are.
necessarily have to put these in the right to farm law, but I would certainly put them in the zoning code definitions.
Okay,
But I don't know if you need, I mean, I think. Oh, I see. You're describing small farm as a commercial.
and I don't know that these are still right? These are things that we had put
Endeavor,
together a
okay.
long time ago when we were talking about the resource.
Have
guide.
Commercial farm was defined above.
I don't know that we did, yes.
Okay, any farm that grows, raises to sell. Okay. All right.
So I guess let the conversation ensue. This is kind of what we were gonna work on next.
Any commercial farm.
How do you want to do that small farm on a small piece of property? You want to
So
name
what's the
that
difference
as,
between a small farm and an urban farm?
Yeah, so that's great question, right? Literally, this is all we had. I'm just pulling up the stuff we had. So these aren't necessarily recommendations. This is how we had done it previously.
You have the difference between small farm and that and the next. You
Oh, yeah,
kinda tried
thank
to,
you, thank you. Yep. So the difference between the small farm, urban farm, hobby farm, and homestead, the main difference between a hobby farm and a small farm is that a small farm, urban farm is intended to generate revenue.
Sheila,
Yes?
I'm having connectivity problems. I am gonna drop out of the meeting and come back in on my iPad and see
Okay,
if that's any better.
okay. Let me go back to, because I think when she drops, I'm gonna have to let her back. I'm gonna stop the share for a minute. I don't know Zoom well enough to know how to do this, not blind.
so
Well,
the,
go ahead, Tom.
well, the definitions there could be combined like that last paragraph did. And you could also denote it with the size of acreage if you wanted to. But there's a dispute will be, who's selling and who's not selling and whatever's going on there. So it's just a definition issue. But in the long run, they still require you to show your gross sales for any kind of tax deferment. So that
Right,
that may change also because they're working on reducing that gross sales at the state level, and they're also working on trying to get it in there. I think it was at $1,000 instead of 10,000, and also not having to show your Schedule F because there's been a lot of discussion on who's using that information or data that they have on your farm. So
Mhm.
that's all
I caught
happening through, Farm Bureau, Tom?
some of it's through Farm Bureau, some of it's statements being made by the politicians that are trying to garner support from Farm Bureau. So it's all lobbying stuff and some of the other issues that you know about that are happening here on Grand Island also. So
Yeah. So I think, like, I don't know that they can be combined because there is definitely a difference now that I'm rereading these things. There's definitely a difference between a small farm and an urban farm. The urban farm was kind of what Jeff Kehoe had said made Grand Island so unique, right? In that we have residential areas that are pretty tightly packed. Maybe somebody only has a half an acre, but on a half an acre, you can grow a lot of food. You could make a lot of money potentially, right, on a half an acre. And so that was kind of the urban farm definition, is that property resides within a tightly contained residential area versus a small farm, but urban is also commercial, could also be commercial. Small is also on a smaller size piece of property, however, also commercial. And then hobby farm or homestead, not commercial, right? Strictly for personal use, although you could also sell you know, overrun, right? Stuff that you don't need anymore. So, but the intent is not commercial sales.
And that's gonna be unprotected, you know, anywhere, even if it's in the ag district, so.
Yeah, but part of our right to farm law, you know, this is what we kind of have to keep circling back to. Oh, hang on. Saying letter in, but I don't see, oh, there we go. Okay. Hopefully she's back. Okay. Hey, Wendy.
There we go.
Hi, sorry about that.
That's okay. We were just refreshing ourselves on small farm is small property, commercial use, urban farm, small farm in a tightly defined residential area, also commercial, versus homestead, hobby farm, intent is not commercial, although they may sell their products as well, right? But the intent is not that.
Okay. That, if you're gonna include those definitions, then that all needs to be well described so that anyone else, aside from us, that reads them will understand the differentiation.
Yeah,
Well, my suggestion would be defining it first as commercial or a hobby farm. Because to me, those are two totally different things, right? And then you're
Yes.
gonna break it down where it's gonna be, you know, is it a large operation, an urban operation? So basically, you're defining it first, you know, if they're commercial or hobby farm idea, I like hobby only because it really, the small farm could, in that definition, I think it's more confusing versus commercial and small because it obviously small and commercial could be the same. But define it, commercial and then hobby farm, and then go down from there. Is it an urban commercial? Is it this hobby? That would be my thought process of
yeah, I like that, Jen. I think that's an easier way to break it down. And then we could kind of we could nest it under the commercial farm operation, which is really at the very top of that sheet, right? That, you
Mhm.
know, any farm which grows crops, raise livestock, and then we could just say, you know, to further define a commercial farm operation, because for some reason everybody thinks if you're commercial, you have to have, you know, 100
Yeah.
acres, and that's not Grand Island, right? Nobody's
Right.
gonna have 1,000 or 100 acres. So I think it's easier if we, I think it's easier than if we just split off from that main one. And then we could have a separate paragraph that just says hobby farm.
Mhm. What do you think, Tom?
Well, as far as that goes, that's probably a good idea, you know, everything pretty much on the east side of Grand Island or the east side of the, you know, the 190 is gonna be hobby, basically, you know, small acreage stuff, except for the big chunks of property that are hidden way back in the bushes. And
Mhm.
those won't be urban or anything like that. I mean, there's 200-acre pieces back behind, or
Yeah.
I don't know what you want to call it, in front of the East River area. But on the west side of the island, you know, you could have a half an acre in the middle of nowhere, and that would be a small farm
Mhm.
defined. You know, not in an urban area where there's you know, high population density or whatever you want to call it. So
Right.
yeah.
I guess I want to be careful about putting acreage around it, because then that seems to be the thing that gets latched onto. And I
Yeah,
don't
I
want
would
that to
agree with you
become,
there when it comes to that, the over defined. So to me, in my head, I'm thinking, is this a commercial operation where they're actually trying to bring in some funds and they have some kind of money movement? Or is it a hobby farm where they grew some tomatoes in the back and they're throwing them out front to sell? I think that's the whole premise of what the zoning would look for, code would look, whatever. They would want those defined in that direction. I think when you get to going to acreage and that, I think that starts to turn into a big thing of interpretation.
yeah,
Well, and
and it
the
really
biggest
doesn't,
thing is we want to make sure that the code enforcement guys understand which direction to head in if
Yes,
if
yeah.
they're out there with their little book and they're doing their thing, so.
You're right, and that's why
Yep.
the definitions have to be very clear.
Specific, yep,
Yep. So if you're talking about a small farm that has a farm stand out front kind of thing, then that would be a small commercial farm. But, just be very clear.
Okay,
I mean, more is more in this sense because that way there can't be any chance of misinterpretation, although I'm sure it can still happen, but
So I'm sorry, so are you guys in favor of adding acreage into that language or not?
not,
no, you don't, no, I wouldn't
Yeah.
say so, it doesn't
Okay.
matter.
Yeah,
That,
I'm not, I just wanted to, I wasn't quite clear, the direct, gotcha.
well,
Yeah.
what happens is you put in more definitions and then you put in more defining parts of those definitions, then you end up running around in circles with
Yeah,
your
I agree
hair-
with you, Tom.
your
Yeah.
hair on fire, so, yeah, yep.
okay. All right, so the one that I left off of this discussion, but it's on this document that I sent out, is the one that it's in the past caused, a lot of conversation, which is startup farm operation. Now, the state defines a startup farm operation. You
Yep.
have, depending on what it is that you are farming, depending on what your agricultural product is, there are varying years that are associated with, if it's an apple orchard, a startup operation could be, I'm making this number up because I don't remember, but it could be 5 years. Whereas if it's chickens, it could be, 1 year or whatever. So it kind of depends on what's being grown. What the definition by the state is in terms of startup operation. That really has to do with more the financial end of things. It doesn't really have a darn thing to do with whether you're commercial or not, right? Because according to the state, you're commercial. You are just in a startup state, right? That's just the initial state of your farm operation. So in the past, this has come up because somebody's not making money. Well, somebody's probably not going to be making money if they're, going to sell apples and they've got 2-year-old trees, right? They're not going to be making any money. So I don't know I guess, does adding this and being very clear in the definition make it easier for us to point to something should the question ever arise again? Or should this, turn into kind of an issue? Or is this, just putting more fuel in the fire? Thoughts?
Well, the time frame that they give you in some of the cases is upwards of 7 years, for specifically Christmas trees. I don't know if that's just for a tax exemption or it's just for a grower or a producer of whatever. With a chicken operation, it could be, tomorrow. If you got, 18-week-old birds and they're coming in, but I don't know. It's difficult to put it. It would be easy to just take that whole chunk, copy and paste it into the document and say specifically these parameters. So, that might be an idea there.
So
And
do you think that's needed? Anybody else? Kim, Kristen, Wendy, Jen, Brett?
I don't think you would need to specify it, but I mean, because it depends, like Tom said, it really depends on what you're doing. They're all
Yep.
different.
yeah.
Horses are 5 years, I think.
yeah,
Right,
and they break that out too. So, yeah. As far as money and amount of horses. So,
Yeah, well, yeah, horses are different altogether.
we could be selling that manure tomorrow though.
If you want some, let me know.
so I don't know, I'm kind of torn. Wendy, Jen, what do you think? Could we just put a reference to 25 AA Article 10 or whatever
Yes.
it is?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that's probably the best way to do it.
And that way, as they update, they're just referencing the most current state law.
Yeah.
Plus, I forget, was it in our document that we put together 3, 4 years ago? Do you remember? Was there
The,
anything in there about that? Yeah, this thing here.
our reference guide?
That's,
Yeah,
that's.
Bridging the
but that's
Future, the Town of Grand Island Comprehensive Plan. I forget if it
the
was in there. or
comprehensive
not.
Oh,
plan.
no, that's the comprehensive plan, Tom. This is the one you want. This is the one we did.
Right.
No,
Oh, the
you got a
different,
different
yeah,
one.
that's the other one. Yeah, I got it. Yep.
I don't think so. I went through this whole book this weekend.
Yeah,
It had been a long time since I had looked at it. There's some good stuff in here. And I don't recall seeing that chart in there.
you haven't memorized that yet? What the heck?
I know, right?
I know I haven't.
Yeah, I don't recall seeing that in there. Which, by the way, this is a really good question. Does everybody have a copy of this? Is there anyone that needs a copy of the reference guide or the resource guide?
I think I only have it electronically. Actually, I don't
Jen,
even know if
do you have it?
I don't
I'm
have
sure.
that one,
one.
Sheila.
I'm sure Jim's got more copies somewhere.
He doesn't, but we talked about him being able to get some more printed, so that's why I want to know. I want everybody on the town board to have one. I definitely want everybody on the ag board to have one. So I guess if you don't have one, if you don't want to shout it out right now, then just shoot me an email.
I don't have a physical hard copy.
Okay,
Same with me.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't
You
have a hard
should.
copy.
Yeah. Everybody on the ag board should,
yes,
That's-
agree.
essentially your Bible.
Yes.
But it makes good reading just before bed.
Yes, I keep mine right next to my bed.
So, all right, so did we decide then we should put the startup farm operation in there? I can rework this definition to make it a little bit clearer and reference, 25 AA, whatever it is in the state code. And then
Yeah,
I
that-
think, my to-dos out of this meeting will be to get you back a better version of this, a more complete version of this.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, so I had two things as kind of next steps, and I guess let's talk about these. I am concerned that we're gonna pile too much stuff up on Pete and his board and, the town all at once. We kind of were in multiple holding patterns and now everything's kind of coming loose. So they've got two things that are pretty important, I think, for us to work through. I think the R1A through R1E, we had talked about that being the next thing after definitions.
Yep.
I guess I'm just wondering, like, are we opening up a can of worms that I don't want to fight two battles, I guess is my point. I feel like we're gonna have to really push to get the agricultural animals code changed.
Yeah.
So thoughts? Jen, you got your feet in both sides of the universe here. What are your thoughts?
I think we should get some of this stuff in front of them approved before we start going forward more. Cause it's gonna look like a major push or an attack on so much of you. What the
Agreed.
hell are they doing? Cause it wasn't meant to come this way. It's just kind of how things have come with other things that we've had to sidetrack or go back and do and whatnot. And so everything is just kind of coming together. And now with the new administration and the new way they're doing it, I think we should work on getting some of those things approved through first before we work on zoning.
I mean, we can work on other things, but just don't pass it along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
agree.
So, okay, so we could take a look at those. I did not send those out today. But I can certainly send them out. I can share them on my screen too, if we want to go over that today. But I just wanted to talk through the other thing that I put on there for next steps was review the resource guide implementation plan. Obviously we can't do that until we have that in front of you guys. I will minimally send you all I'll cut down the whole guide, so you don't have to download the whole PDF and go through it. I'll just kind of pull out the implementation section and I'll send it to everybody for the next, for the next meeting. Because what I'd like to do there, we had, a whole lot of steps, right? A whole lot of things that had to be done on Grand Island to make it ag friendly and to comply with the farmland protection plan that the town passed. And we've done some of those things. And we're now circling into a whole lot of things that I've got kind of arrows pointing to where we're working on them or they're in process. They just haven't been finalized yet. So, and the town still has to take action on them. But I guess I'd like to think through, of those things that are remaining, what do we think as a board is going to be important after this? Because I think once we get through the ag animals, the accessory use, the zoning for, each of the residential types, I'd like us to kind of think through what we think is the next important step. We threw a lot of things into that implementation plan. There was
Yep.
things Pete is actually working on now, like the ditches and the water and conservation and all of that stuff was written in there as well. And that stuff that Pete's working on independently from us, but it was still part of the resource guide. So thoughts?
Well, the biggest deal is the ditches right now. That's gonna be number one in his list. If we've got 2 items to hand over to them to look at, that would probably be a good start to see how they're gonna take us as far as whatever we may suggest. So we've got at least 2 items almost
Yeah,
ready.
we've given them 2 items as of this week, right? Or
Right,
last week, yeah.
so we'll know within the next month what's gonna happen with that. We should have 2 more ready to go and within the next month and a half. That's
Right,
my, yep. So the accessory structures is one, right? And
Yeah.
probably the animal part of it too.
yeah, they already have those, Tom. I already sent those over for them. So that should be queued up for them for the end of the month. Jen said their meeting is the end of the month.
And then the next 2, whatever we choose right now to get out of the way.
Yeah,
And hopefully they won't come back in our face.
I think the definitions is gonna be relatively easy. I can't see much of an issue with that. Okay,
Yeah.
No, I see a lot of, how can they argue with that?
right. They're just straight up definitions. Easy
Right.
enough. And the intent is certainly to make it easier for code enforcement when they're trying to identify, what is this? This is
Yeah.
a farm, they say, what is this farm and what type is it, et cetera. So should just make things easier for them.
There was a small section that's in your code. And it's section 407-145. And it's called agricultural uses. And we had looked at that. And unfortunately, I can't bring it up on the screen. But if we're going to stay consistent with the right to farm law, then the word uses should be replaced with practices. Because you define agricultural practices. So if this little code or this small regulation is going to stay under your supplemental regulations. And when we looked at it, it had 3 provisions and we struck all 3 of them. The first one was agricultural uses shall be conducted on a minimum 3-acre lot. No. Second,
Right,
agricultural uses shall not store any material or substance of any kind that causes or is likely to cause offensive or noxious odors less than 100 feet from any property line or 200 feet from neighboring residents. We struck that. 3, agricultural uses shall not create a reasonable nuisance by reason of dust, fumes, smoke, odor, insects, rodents, or otherwise. first of all, how does one define reasonable versus unreasonable? That's too subjective. We struck that. Then we added agricultural practices shall be in conformance with chapter 145 of the town code, farming, that's your right to farm law, and in accordance with the provisions of the zoning district wherein such practices occur. Then we added the keeping of chickens shall be undertaken in accordance with section 407, 144.1 of this chapter. And then we added the keeping of sheep for grazing shall be permitted on properties containing major solar energy collection systems or solar farms, period. So we took out the first three and we added these three, which are basically just references to town codes. So I guess then my general question is, why is 407, 145 even needed? Unless it's a good idea to have reference to those other areas that permit and regulate farming practices.
So my question is, I just looked up on E-code and 407, 145 has the 3 acres, the blah, blah, the blah, blah.
Yeah,
It's
And
not
then-
been changed. Did we have something that we
no,
did?
no, no, I'm looking at a marked up copy that I had from, wow, March 16th, 2022. So it's been sitting out there, but I haven't forgotten about it. So I think it's something we probably should move. I like the idea of, number one, striking the first three because none of them make sense, but then adding those other three that I read to you, which are basically just references of the town regulations, starting with the right to farm law that allows and protects agricultural uses. So we reference the right to farm law, the chicken law, and then the fact that you can graze sheep.
Yeah,
all
because that's nowhere right now. I
Right.
mean,
Oh.
that is nowhere and that should be somewhere. So can you
I
send that
thought
out
they
to
approved
everybody?
that.
Sorry?
Wasn't that approved? Because didn't you have somebody who's doing it?
We have somebody who's doing it, but I mean, that portion of the 407, 145 was not added, is what I'm saying.
In other words, they didn't change it, right?
Correct.
So the sheep issue still comes into, it still comes up occasionally and, it's part of,
Consistently, it just came up again. Yeah.
when was that?
So it is, so there's nowhere in the code right now that indicates that you can graze sheep on solar farms?
I thought they put something in the solar law.
Solar law, yeah, one would think.
Their intention is to do that, but I don't believe it's done yet.
Okay. So Wendy, can you send that that mock-up of 407, 145
will.
out to everybody?
Yeah.
And let's tackle that next because that is important. And I did not realize when we
Yeah.
changed 145.1, the right to farm law, that
It-
145 didn't get changed.
Right. I guess it's because you have so many of these little pieces of things in your code that, and this one is clearly restrictive and unreasonable. So it either has to be rescinded or revised. And I think the best way to revise it is, as I suggested, referencing the other places in the code where agricultural practices are regulated and permitted.
Yeah.
Except sheep, but let me bring up let me go online and look for your sheep law. I mean, your solar law.
So, all right. So I just want to keep straight because we just said we were going to do a lot of things. I'm going to rework the definition document. I'm going to send that out to everybody. I'm going to send you the implementation plan from the resource guide and try to get printed copies for everybody. Because I think Tom and I and Wendy are probably the only ones that have them.
I have one.
Oh, Jen, you have one? Okay. Okay. And then I definitely heard that we can't pile on to the town at this point, kind of as they're pulling into their new, new way of doing things. So we've sent them two in the month of April. I think we need to let it ride, see what kind of response we get back in May before we spend a ton of time. Because, I mean, one of the things that Pete had said is, give us high level explanation, understanding of what you try to do, what you want to do. Don't try to write the code, don't try to write the law, and let the people who are, kind of the experts in the room do that and come back to you with suggestions. So
don't-
hopefully we'll get suggestions in May. Is that
Sheila,
not
I
right,
think you can
Jen?
yeah, I think you can send the other two things. I just think don't start with the R1A.
Yeah,
I I would not send that over yet, but you could send, I think we have a
Oh,
total of
no.
4 sitting there.
sorry.
There's 4 things you have set up for the town to look at.
So currently they've got 144, which is ag animals, and 142, which is accessory use. That's what they've got in their hands now. We'd like to do the definitions for sure, and I don't think there's gonna be any squawking about that.
Yeah,
It's
you could
literally just-
send that right over. That'll
Yeah.
all get looked at the same time.
And then the other one is, well, I want to rewrite it and I want this board to
Okay.
review it before I send it to anybody. So before I send it to the town. And then the other one is that draft that Wendy's got, that 145 that we somehow
Yeah.
stepped over. That
Yeah.
I think should be the next thing.
Yeah, okay.
And that one I think is gonna get a little bit of concern, I'll just say.
I always think one way or the other, never know. Never know.
What was that, Jen?
It never seems to go the way I think things are gonna go, so.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that kind of gives us what we need to work on next.
Right.
We'll
Now,
hold,
just
sorry.
to let you know, I'm in your solar law, which is chapter, it's in the zoning regulations, it's 407-165-1, solar energy facilities. And there is a section, it's item H20, and it talks about agricultural resources. And it just focuses on projects that are located on ag lands. That's the only place that I see any reference to any agriculture, but I think Jen is right. There's no place in here yet where it talks about allowing the grazing of sheep on solar project properties, solar farms.
Right. Yeah, and
So-
but I think she said the intent is for it to be there. I don't
Yeah,
think
I mean, from what I remember, we sent a ton of information over
we did.
a while ago. And so it's sitting there, and I think it's not, I think they know what they need to do with it. And
Yeah.
they're trying, or whatnot. I just don't think it's been completed yet. So, I mean, it's a reminder that I can bring up. I know they just had this discussion again about another farm somewhere. They know it's an issue and they know it needs to get addressed. It's just a matter of who's leading it, I guess is probably what it is. So I could ask and see if anyone's working on it.
That'd be
Okay.
huge. Thank you, Jen.
Well, the big question there also is, that's a commercial operation. If it's a solar farm that's already in operation.
Yeah, 100%.
So, that the state will, as they stand right now, pushing solar real hard. They're gonna push for anything that they feel is, if that's restrictive, any regulations that we may come up with or that the town code may find restrictive, they're gonna fight that at the state level, so.
I don't really
That's
think
definitely,
the town has a problem with the sheep grazing. I think it's just a matter of getting the language in there.
yeah, and
okay.
sometimes it's just the local, people that don't understand what's going
Yeah.
on, so. They stand up and they start a ruckus at a meeting, and then the town has to address it because somebody brought it up.
Yeah, I walked out with the pastor, like, the last time they talked about it, might have been 2 meetings ago or what, town hall, anyways. And he's like, wow, the sheep. He's like, where do I get those? Who would have thought? I go, actually, it's a pretty high demand. I'm like, people really, and he's like, well, who watch? I go, the farmer, whoever has those sheep, they don't want them on the property any longer than they have to be, because one, they want them healthy, and two, they can move them. I'm like, they don't want them there. They're, you know, and he's like, wow, I didn't know that. I'm like, yep.
Yep. Not
And this
making
was
money if they're sitting there.
And this was the church across the street that was asking me.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay, all right. I think we're at like 11:15, but I don't feel like we could really start anything else right now. And I think we've got enough to kind of get through and get prepared for the next meeting. I will send over the R1A through R1E. Wendy, I'll send you a message because I think I'm missing 2 of them. I think I'm missing D and B or something. So I'll go through what I've got. I'll let you know. And then I'll send those out to the group as well, and we can start at least looking at those. Those won't be the thing that we'll address next. The thing we'll address next is 407, 145, and we'll
Mhm.
review those definitions, and then take a look at the resource guide and make sure there's nothing huge that we're missing. I want to make sure, I don't know if Wendy's gonna get extended, like I still haven't heard the budget explanation from Pete, so I want to make sure we're utilizing Wendy to the most that we can while we still have her. So that's why I kind of want everybody to take a look at the implementation.
Because I just realized that once we get through these things and we, you know, we're making good progress, you know, yeah, I mean, I'm done. So,
I know. I don't know what we'll do then, but
oh, you'll do just fine. Because we will have hopefully fixed, you know, the
yeah,
stuff that needed to be fixed and, you know, remove the unreasonable restrictions from your code.
yeah, let's hope. Okay,
Plus, I think
anybody?
I
Sorry?
just want to say, I think you all should feel good that you are helping to implement the resource guide. You know, a lot of times communities adopt these plans, whether it's comprehensive plan, ag plan, whatever, and they don't always put them to use. It's like, oh, great, we have this wonderful plan. Okay, well, adopting it and preparing it was the easy part. Now you got to put it into action. And so that's, I think, what you guys are doing. And so that's a really good thing.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
yeah.
Okay, anybody have anything else? Okay. Could I have a motion to close?
motion to close.
Second?
Second,
Thank you all very much. Have an awesome day. We're going to close at 10:48.
Take
all
care,
right.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.